Hey, welcome back to my channel. My name is Keith Beard, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 5 classroom activities that I use in my middle school classroom. So these are activities that I've actually been borrowing from other levels of education. I've taught high school before, and I've taught community college and even a few university courses. And I've found that a lot of activities that can be used in those areas can also be applied to the middle school classroom. And I also found that when I was teaching at those levels, that middle school ideas could be applied in those classrooms. So these ideas I think are really applicable all across the board, even across subject areas. They're ideas that can be pretty much used on any day and for any subject. So I hope you get a lot out of this. And so let's start with the first activity. So my first classroom activity I want to go over is the whip around sit down discussion method. So the whip around sit down discussion method is kind of an adaptation of the think, pair, share. And I found that the think, pair, share is really great in the classroom, but oftentimes I found for me that when students were pairing or even when they were sharing, that it was kind of hard to figure out when they were finished discussing something and when they had gotten off task. And the whip around sit down does a lot of the things that the think, pair, share accomplishes. It also allows me to know when the students are finished discussing the topic that they're on. So the way the whip around sit down discussion method works is students take time to think. So it's just like a think, pair, share. They take time to think. And once you've done the thinking portion, they actually all stand up. And each person in the group, could be pairs or a small group of 3 or 4, each person in the group will share their thoughts and they'll have a brief conversation. And when they finish the conversation, they all sit down. And as a teacher, you can gauge when everybody is finished with the topic because you'll see that everybody is sitting down or mostly sitting down. And this way you don't have those extra minutes of wasted discussion time where the students are still talking, but they're actually talking about, what they're doing that afternoon or something they saw on TV the night before. So the whip around sit down really helps you as a teacher gauge when they're finished with the conversation. Another thing that this does is it encourages students to continue talking about the topic. What you'll see students do with this discussion method is they'll be looking around the room, seeing others continuing to talk. They're all still standing. They're all still having the conversation. And, if they realize that they've run out of things to talk about, but everybody else in the room is still conversing, they're going to try to continue to pull out more information and go a little bit further in depth and think about it in other ways so that they can continue talking about it. Because you really don't want to be that group that sits down after 15 seconds when everyone else is spending the 2 minutes or 3 minutes having a full conversation. So it does put some peer pressure on everyone to continue talking and engaging in the conversation. And the last thing that I like about this is that for me as a teacher, I can actually walk around the room and engage in conversation a little bit better than when they are sitting down. If they're just in pairs or they're all sitting in small groups, then I kind of feel like I'm, circulating as this, supervisor that's coming in to look down on them and say, okay, what are y'all talking about? And what are you talking? Are you on task? What is it you're saying? And so what I like to do as when they're standing up is circulate around the room, and then you're a little bit more on their level. So you're looking eye to eye instead of me down on them. And it kind of feels like I'm able to join in on each group and be part of the conversation and help them with what they're talking about. So the whip around sit down is my first classroom activity that I think is really great for any classroom. My second best classroom activity is the exit slip. One thing I know that most teachers struggle with is getting those quick formative assessments that we need to gauge where students are in the daily lesson. A lot of times if we wait until the big test or the big project or the big writing assignment, we'll see that, hey, this student failed and it was actually way back a few weeks ago that they weren't understanding the concepts and then they got lost. We might try to gauge it on homework, but a lot of times we don't have time to grade homework for accuracy, or we try to grade classwork, but it's hard to find that time to continually grade things for accuracy. And so we end up kind of flying through how we assess students' work and where they are in their learning process. So what the exit slip does is it provides a quick, great way for you to get feedback from the students based on what it is they learned. So the way the exit slip works is at the end of the class, you give them a very short question that calls for a very short writing response, and it focuses on one area that you want to assess. I like to use reflection type questions on this so that my students can actually write in a way that engages in thinking about what they learned or what it is that they're struggling with. So my prompts are often very reflective in nature, but once they finish the exit slip, They can do it on a scratch sheet or they can do it on a regular sheet of paper. They hand it to you as they're walking out the door. And so this also alleviates if you ever have issues with students getting up and packing up before the bell rings and they want to go stand at the door and you're constantly yanking them back on the leash to get back in their seats. This keeps them in their seats, accomplishing something they need to do until the end of the period. And when the bell rings, they get up and they hand you the slip, and that's how they get out of the door. I've had students tell me that this has been life-changing for them in terms of their performance in my class, because it not only shows the teacher what it is that they've learned or what they're struggling with, it also helps the student really pare down what was important about that day's lesson. Throughout a 50-minute or a 90-minute period, you're going to have a lot of topics, a lot of activities, a lot of things going on, and there's like one or two things that you really want the student to take away from that class and to carry with them. After all that time, they can often kind of miss what was most important about the class, and so that exit slip question can really pinpoint like, okay, look, this is what was important for class today, and this is what you need to take away, and I hope you got it. And if you didn't, I need you to communicate that to me so that we can go back and reteach it. So the exit slip is excellent for formative assessments, getting a quick review of what the concepts were that were taught, and it could also help you as a teacher really gauge where your students are. So you can catch them where they need remediation or extra help before we get too far into the unit and they end up bombing a test or something. Okay, on a similar note, my third best classroom activity is a quick write to learn assignment. So a write to learn assignment can be in the form of a quick write, or it could even be in form of something a little more formal. But a writing to learn assignment is where you take the concepts that you're studying in class and you put it into a word problem. So for example, you could have, say, in a physics class or in a science class, I know in our 8th grade science classes, students are learning about velocity and acceleration and mass and some physics type concepts. And so what you can do is give them a problem where two boys are arguing about the velocity of a baseball. One says that the baseball is at a higher velocity when it's thrown from the pitcher's hand. And another boy says, no, it's at a higher velocity when the batter hits the ball and it goes out into the field. And so then you give them some numbers and then you say, okay, instead of doing like a math problem and just giving me the number, I need you to explain how you get to that end product. And it's essentially like showing a proof in a math class, but you're doing it in the form of writing. There's a lot of research out there that shows that writing can actually help students internalize and really apply concepts and help it stick. And so these write to learn assignments are really great as an activity to help students drive home those concepts. The exit slip before can kind of be a writing to learn assignment where at the end of the class they're actually putting their knowledge into practice into a piece of writing. I like to use this in English because we can do a quick write in the middle of class where, let's say we're reading a story or we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird or some sort of, we're reading some sort of text, and I can stop and say, okay, right now I want you to write 3 sentences about what it is the main character is learning at this moment. Or I want you to give me 2 sentences. I want you to give me 2 to 3 sentences explaining some characterization. You can even extend it a little bit and say, okay, right now we've got a student that's absent. We'll call him Tim. I need y'all to write a letter to Tim letting him know what they missed in the first 15 minutes of class. Or something like that, where you're giving students kind of a problem to work through or some sort of assignment or task that forces them to say, okay, everything we just learned in the past couple of minutes or everything we've been learning, I've got to put it into writing. And formalizing those thoughts is a great way to make it stick. So my 4th best classroom activity is helping students get engaged in discussion. You may have heard of a Socratic discussion method before, and what I like to do is complicate the Socratic discussion method and add some game theory to it. So I always like to add a competitive element to our discussions in class, assigning point values for comments that include references to the text, or levelizing comments that are more higher level thinking than those that aren't. So for example, when we are reading To Kill a Mockingbird, I tell my students that we're going to be studying Southern Gothic literature through the novel, and we'll have a first discussion on this concept of Southern Gothic literature, and I will levelize the comments so that when they find evidence in the text of Southern Gothic literature, what they find will actually gain them more points. So a level 1 might be like the setting, because it's kind of easy to see that this dilapidated building that has all this overgrowth, like Boo Radley's house, is Southern Gothic literature. But if they find some figurative language in the text that reflects Southern Gothic literature, that's a little bit more difficult to find. That's a little bit more higher level thinking. So a comment about the setting with a text reference will be a level 1 worth 1 point. And then like the figurative language might be a level 3 and worth 3 points. What this does is it encourages students to get really active in their pre-planning for the conversation, because they're going to want to look not only for the easy comments where they can snag some easy points, but they'll also look for those more difficult text references that'll get them more points. I don't really like to give them a grade based solely on how many points they get. The competitive elements kind of separate. I'll have some sort of reward, like maybe some candy or this, right? They can wear the crown and be the king of ELA discussion. And so it's just kind of an extra element to get them engaged in the discussion, to give them some sort of prize for their competition. Last year, I actually had the students request me to make t-shirts for those that had like the top 3 number of total points, because we had a running total of points over the course of a unit study. And so, just kind of making it fun. That's the whole point, is to think a little bit less about, okay, let's have this like Socratic discussion where we're going to really engage in the text and go deep in the concepts. I want to do that, but I also want to encourage them to think about how they can make this fun and get some enjoyment out of it and turn it into some sort of game. My 5th and last best classroom activity that I use on a regular basis is the extended anchor chart. I'm always trying to get my students to think divergently about the concepts we're learning in class. I want them to really extend their thinking and really apply it to a whole bunch of like outside things. I don't want them to just give me the straight answer. I want them to think creatively about what we're studying. I don't want them to just think like, oh, Mr. Beard taught us this. He asked me the question, I give them the answer. I want them to not only be able to give me the answer, but then to just keep spreading it out. And so on an extended anchor chart, what I do is I give them a question or some sort of prompt, and I usually do this in groups. You have the whole class. Class is probably too big to do this as a whole class, but if you do it in groups where they're rotating around stations or something like that, I tell them that you can give your answers or give your terms or your responses on the anchor chart, but nothing can be repeated. And so for the first group, it's pretty easy because they're getting all the basic answers. Then the second and third groups, they're having to extend their thinking some more. But then you get to the fourth and fifth groups, and now all the easy answers are up on the anchor chart. And they're thinking, I don't know, Mr. Beard, I don't have anything else that I can add to it. And I say, well, you need to think a little bit creatively about the question, about the prompt. Try to go outside of what it is that we've been talking about and apply this to other areas. Synthesize this with something in another subject, or apply it to a current event or a movie or something that you've seen in your life, and try to extend this concept outwardly, right? So if we're doing Southern Gothic literature, I might say, okay, give me examples of Southern Gothic elements in literature, and they list everything from To Kill a Mockingbird, and then they list things that they can apply it to, and they're like, Mr. Beard, I can't remember. And I'm like, well, hey, did you ever see Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Are there any Southern Gothic literature elements in that? Or have you seen another movie that's set in the South that might reflect some of these things? Or what about your neighborhood? Have you ever seen anything in your neighborhood? So I try to get them to think in a way that is just extending beyond what we're doing in class and to start applying it elsewhere. And I'll do a couple of rounds, so that those first two groups, that they're not getting off easy, that they got to come back around and they have the most challenging one because their easy answers are up there and then everybody else added to it, and then they've got to really extend it. I'll also do this when introducing a genre. So for example, when we start a science fiction unit, I'll ask the class, what is science fiction? And we'll put answers up on an anchor chart. And then maybe the next period, so second period, I'll say, what is science fiction? But you can't use anything that's up on the board. And we add everything to the anchor chart. And then third period, what's science fiction? You can't use everything on the board. And so by the time we get to the end of the day, we have this really vast, complicated web of ideas where we're really defining science fiction in a thorough way and getting them to engage really deeply in the concept and thinking about what something is. So those are my 5 best classroom activities. Hope you got something out of it. Hit subscribe, drop me a comment. I hope to see you around again soon. And hey, we're going to be doing this once a week. I hope you come back and get some more information, and bring me some information too. Drop me a comment and say, hey, those 5 activities are pretty cool, but check out these 5 activities too. I would love to hear from you, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.